A struggling single dad stops to help a woman push her broken-down Carenly to discover she owns the entire dealership chain he's been trying to get a job at for months. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The alarm buzzed at 5:42 a.m. But Michael was already awake. He lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of their two-bedroom rental, listening to the soft breathing of his kids down the hall. The radiator clanked once, then gave up, as if reminding him they'd need to bundle up again today. Winter in Clarksville didn't play around, not when your windows leaked cold air and the heater had one foot in the grave. He slid out from under the blanket, careful not to wake Eli, who'd crawled into bed during the night after a bad dream. The little guy clung to his dad like a baby koala. When things got roughened lately, things had been rough. In the kitchen, the coffee canister gave a hollow clink as Michael shook the last few grounds into the filter. No cream, no sugar, just caffeine and hope. He took a sip, grimaced, and moved on. "Dad?" Emily's voice was groggy as she shuffled in, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing her forehead. "Cold again today. Grab 2 pairs of socks." As Emily headed back to her room, Michael glanced at the kitchen calendar. 2 red circles stared back at him, rent due and the job interview. He'd been trying to get a foot in at Lane Auto Group for months, even just sweeping floors, if it meant steady pay and benefits. Today was a chance if the truck held together long enough to get him there. By 7:15, the kids were bundled up and packed into the beat-up Dodge. The engine stuttered once, then caught with a cough. The gas gauge hovered just above empty. He mentally calculated, drop the kids at school, then coast to the dealership. No room for detours. "Did you pack your gloves this time?" he asked, half teasing, half hopeful. "Yes," Emily said proudly, holding up her mittened hands. Eli just grinned, mouth full of dry cereal. As the truck rolled out of the driveway, Michael let out a long breath. He didn't have much, just an old truck, 2 great kids, and a stubborn refusal to quit. But sometimes, that had to be enough. He didn't know it yet, but life was about to veer in a direction no GPS could predict. Sycamore Street was one of those roads that most people forgot, existed, a narrow stretch tucked behind the post office and winding toward the main drag. The kind of street you took when you were running late and needed a shortcut, or just trying to avoid the traffic light at Main and 5th. Michael knew it well. He'd taken it plenty of times when gas was low and time was tighter. This morning, both were true. The sky was a dull gray blanket overhead, heavy with the promise of snow. Michael tapped the steering wheel in rhythm with the wipers, trying to stay calm. His interview at Lane Auto Group was in less than 20 minutes. If the old Dodge didn't hiccup, if he hit green lights, if the kids had remembered their backpacks and he didn't have to circle back, then maybe, just maybe, he'd make it. But life, as usual, had other plans. Halfway down Sycamore, he spotted a white sedan sitting at an awkward angle near the curb, hazard lights blinking in slow desperation. A woman stood beside it, pacing in a pair of heeled boots completely unsuited for the gravel shoulder. She looked up as Michael's truck rolled closer, her expression tight with frustration. He debated it. Just for a second, he had a place to be, and helping strangers didn't exactly pay the bills. But then, Emily's voice echoed in his head from just this morning. "He always says we help people when we can, because that's what good people do." Michael sighed, pulled to the side, and stepped out. "You okay?" he called over the hum of the engine. The woman turned, startled, and nodded quickly. "It just died. No warning. I tried calling someone, but my signal's trash here." Michael glanced at the car, then at the incline of the road. "Mind if I help push it to the side? You're in a bit of a tricky spot." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, thank you. That would be amazing." Together they leaned into the sedan. Her heels slipped, but she didn't complain. They pushed it out of the road's curve and into a safer spot, engines slowing behind them in quiet gratitude. As they caught their breath, the woman smiled, exhausted but genuine. "Thank you. I didn't expect someone to stop." Michael shrugged. Didn't expect to see a stalled car in heels on Sycamore. Neither of them knew it, but that push was the start of something far bigger than just getting out of traffic. She stood out like a diamond in a gravel lot. The tailored coat cinched neatly at her waist, the high-end boots dusted in road grit, the polished look of someone who didn't belong anywhere near Sycamore Street. Michael noticed it all in the quiet moment after they'd pushed her car to safety. She was breathing hard but trying not to show it, brushing loose strands of dark hair from her face, as if the wind had offended her. "Thank you again," she said, offering him a small, reserved smile. "I really wasn't expecting anyone to stop." Michael gave a modest shrug and tucked his hands into the pockets of his worn work jacket. "Most people don't take this street unless they're avoiding traffic or late to something important." The woman glanced at her car like it had personally betrayed her. "Well, I managed to accomplish both." He smiled despite himself. "Any idea what happened?" "Not a clue," she admitted. "It just shut off. I don't even know if I'm out of gas or if something more serious is going on." Michael stepped forward and leaned slightly over the hood. "Mind if I take a quick look?" She hesitated. "You're a mechanic?" "Something like that," he said, not offering more. She gave a small nod. "Be my guest. Honestly, anything you can do to help would be amazing." He popped the hood and took a brief look, nothing obvious. The battery looked solid, no leaks, nothing burning. But the engine had that slight burnt oil smell that told him it wasn't just a matter of bad luck. "Could be a sensor or the fuel pump," he said finally. "Hard to say without tools." She sighed. "Figures." He glanced back at her. "You headed somewhere important?" The question made her pause. She looked him over briefly, weighing something. "Just out of town for a meeting," she said, carefully vague. Michael nodded. He knew that kind of answer. Polite, guarded. "Well, I can give you a lift somewhere, if you need." She gave him another smile, this one softer. "That's kind of you, but I've got someone coming. Or trying to, anyway." Michael didn't press. Something about her was polished, but tired. Like she'd been holding a facade together for a long time. Whoever she wasn't used to being stranded. And certainly not used to depending on strangers. He nodded once more, then stepped back. "Well, if your ride doesn't show, I'll be around. Name's Michael, by the way." She looked at him for a moment, then offered her hand. "Victoria, and thank you again, Michael." Her grip was firm, professional, but her eyes lingered for a second longer than expected. He tipped his head and walked back toward his truck, that strange feeling still curling at the edge of his chest like something unexpected had just begun. Victoria reached into her sleek leather bag as Michael turned back toward his truck. The wind had picked up, tugging at the hem of her coat, and her fingers moved quickly, pulling out a slim wallet that probably cost more than Michael's entire grocery budget for the month. "Wait," she called. Stepping closer, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Please let me at least give you something for your trouble." Michael turned, eyeing the crisp $100 bill she held out like it might burn his fingers. He offered a half smile, shaking his head slowly. "It's really not necessary." Her brows lifted, as if she hadn't expected him to say no. "You just helped a complete stranger push a dead car up a hill in freezing weather. That's not nothing," he chuckled. "It's also not worth $100. Look, I'm just glad you're safe and out of the road." "That's enough." She frowned, not in annoyance, but in confusion like. She didn't quite know how to process someone turning down money. "Are you sure?" Michael nodded. "Pretty sure. Besides, you've had a rough enough morning without me making it transactional." She stared at him for a moment, studying his face, like she was trying to decide if he was serious or maybe just trying to figure out why someone like him would help someone like her for free. Eventually, she tucked the bill back into her wallet, slowly, deliberately. "Well, thank you, Michael. I mean that." He offered her the warmest smile he could manage despite the cold. "Good luck with the meeting." She tilted her head. "You remembered." "Wasn't hard. You look like someone who's usually on time." That got the faintest smile out of her own that reached her eyes, but quickly disappeared behind her polished exterior. Guess today's the exception. Michael tipped his chin toward her car. If your ride doesn't come through, I'll be at the shop off Maple. Ask for Turner's Garage. Someone will point you the right way. Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful now. Turner's Garage. Got it. He gave her one last look, then climbed into the truck where Emily and Eli were waiting with foggy windows and cold noses. As he pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. Victoria was still standing by the car, watching. He didn't know her story. Didn't expect to see her again. But something about the whole thing, the dead car, the guarded look in her eyes, and the way she said his name, like it mattered, stuck with him longer than it should have. By the time Michael reached the dealership, his truck was groaning like it knew they were on borrowed time. The snow had started to spit in soft flurries, just enough to dust the windshield and blur the road signs. He pulled into the Lane Auto Group lot with a nervous glance at the cracked clock on the dashlight. 53. The interview had been for 8:30 sharp. He parked in the far corner, where the old Dodge wouldn't stand out as much among the polished SUVs and glistening sedans. The dealership gleamed like a showroom straight out of a magazine, glass walls, chrome finishes, and a perfectly shoveled walkway that practically whispered money. He rubbed his hands together, took a breath, and stepped out into the cold. Inside, the heat hit him like a wall. A front desk receptionist barely looked up as he approached, her manicured nails clicking against a keyboard. Michael cleared his throat. Hi, I'm here for an interview. Michael Turner. For the technician position. She glanced at the clock on her screen, then back at him with a polite but practiced smile. That interview was scheduled for 8:30. I know, He hesitated. What was he supposed to say? I stopped to help a woman push her stalled car up a hill? It sounded like an excuse even though it wasn't. I hit traffic, he said instead. Not exactly a lie. She tapped a few keys. I'm sorry, Mr. Turner, they've already filled the position. Michael's heart sank, but he managed a nod. Filled? Already? Yes. The hiring manager met with another candidate earlier this morning and offered him the job on the spot. Of course they did. He stood there for a beat too long, unsure what to say next. The woman's smile softened just a bit. They had quite a few applicants. Timing's everything, I guess. Michael forced a smile. Right. Thanks anyway. Back in the truck, he sat in silence for a minute, hands gripping the wheel, watching flakes settle on the windshield. He could already picture the fridge at home and early empty. The rent due by the end of the week. The gas needle dropping lower. Timing's everything, she'd said. He'd done the right thing that morning. But right didn't pay the bills. Right didn't keep the lights on. With a sigh, he turned the key, and the truck sputtered back to life. Another missed chance. Another door closed. He just didn't know yet another one had opened. The sky was already dimming when Michael pulled into the drive-through lane of the only fast food place still offering half-decent deals. The kids were quiet in the back seat, worn out from school and the cold, their noses red and their fingers tucked inside sleeves. Emily was trying to read a library book by the last slivers of daylight, while Eli tapped his feet against the seat, humming a made-up tune to no one in particular. Michael stared at the faded menu board ahead, the flickering bulbs casting a pale glow over combo meals that cost more than he wanted to spend. He did some quick math in his head: 2 kids' meals and maybe a burger for himself. That would leave just enough for a quarter tank of gas tomorrow, assuming he skipped lunch. He placed the order, and when they pulled around to the window, the cashier gave him a tired smile as he handed over the paper bags. 3 ketchup packets, okay? She asked. Perfect, Michael said with a nod. They parked near the edge of the lot, the smell of fries filling the cab of the truck. Michael passed the food back, watching as Eli eagerly dug in, and Emily unwrapped her sandwich with the care of someone unboxing a treasure. You're not eating? Emily asked, noticing the way Michael was nursing a cup of water. I had a big lunch, he lied, smiling as he turned up the heater for them. She didn't press, but she didn't believe him either. Her eyes lingered a moment longer before returning to her sandwich. Outside, the wind scraped dry leaves across the pavement. Michael leaned his head against the window, the weight of the day pressing heavier now that the adrenaline had worn off. The interview, the rejection. The moment he chose to stop on Sycamore Street, and her Victoria. He hadn't even meant to remember her name, but it kept replaying in his head. The way she smiled like she hadn't in a while. The way she'd said his name soft, curious, maybe even grateful. "Dad?" Eli's voice broke through. "Can we get ice cream after?" Michael chuckled. "Only if they start giving it away." Eli grinned anyway, and Emily offered half her fries without a word. He looked at his kids, these two little people who trusted him to keep them warm and fed and safe. And despite everything, despite missed chances and tight wallets, he felt something settle inside him. Whatever tomorrow brought, he'd keep going. But still, her face lingered. The next morning started like most others too early, too cold, and too many things to juggle at once. Michael was elbow-deep in a sink full of dishes when Eli came barreling into the kitchen, socks sliding across the linoleum. "Dad, there's a big car outside!" Michael paused, the sponge dripping sudsy water into the sink. "What kind of car?" "I don't know," Eli said, eyes wide. "It's black and shiny and looks like a spaceship." Michael frowned, wiped his hands on a towel, and moved to the window. Sure enough, parked across the street in front of their small rental was a black SUV, sleek tinted windows, and not the kind of vehicle that typically visited this part of town. Definitely not a pizza delivery. "Did anyone get out?" he asked, already pulling on his boots. "Not yet," Eli said, clearly impressed. Michael stepped onto the porch just as the driver's side door opened and a familiar figure stepped out. The wind lifted the hem of her coat, but she moved with that same quiet confidence, heels clicking on the cracked sidewalk, hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. "Victoria," he blinked. For a second, he wondered if he was imagining her, if his mind had just conjured her up because he hadn't stopped thinking about her since yesterday. But then she smiled, real and hesitant, as if unsure she should be there. "Morning," she said. Michael stood there, stunned. "I wasn't expecting company." She glanced around at the modest neighborhood, her SUV looking comically out of place amid rusting pickups and weathered sedans. "I know this is strange. I'm not usually the type to show up unannounced. No offense," Michael said slowly. "But you don't exactly seem like the type to show up here at all." That got a small laugh out of her. "Fair." He stepped off the porch, folding his arms against the cold. "So, to what do I owe the visit?" Victoria hesitated, then met his eyes. "I wanted to thank you. Properly. And maybe talk." Michael's brow lifted. "Talk?" She nodded. "About a job, and maybe about yesterday." Behind him, Eli was plastered to the window, breath fogging the glass. Michael followed her gaze to the SUV, then back to her. "You sure you're not lost?" Victoria smiled. "Pretty sure." And just like that, everything shifted. They sat on the porch steps, two mismatched figures framed by peeling paint and a creaky railing. Michael had offered her coffee, but Victoria had politely declined, eyeing the chipped mug like it was something she hadn't touched in years. The cold nipped at their fingertips, but neither seemed in a hurry to move the conversation inside. There was something about the open air that made truths easier to breathe. "So," Michael said, eyeing her carefully, "you mentioned a job." Victoria folded her hands in her lap, her nails neat, manicured, and completely out of place in a neighborhood where grease under your fingernails was just part of the day. "Yes, but before we get into that, I should probably tell you who I am." Michael raised a brow. "Well, you're Victoria. Drives a fancy SUV. Pushes cars in heels. I figured that much." She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed serious. Victoria Lane. The name hit him with the force of a tire iron. He didn't say anything for a second, just stared, trying to process. Lane. As in Lane Auto Group. As in the name on every dealership sign in a 100-mile radius. As in the very company that had turned him away just the day before. "No way," he said finally, shaking his head. You're… that Lane? Victoria nodded. CEO, inheritor, reluctant public face, take your pick. He let out a low whistle and leaned back. Well, that explains the car, and the shoes. And the awkward hovering after you refused my money, she added with a small smile. Michael gave a dry laugh. I thought you looked a little too polished to be stranded on Sycamore. She looked out at the street, her expression unreadable. It was supposed to be a quiet drive to clear my head. I didn't expect to meet someone who'd change my whole day. He watched her closely. So why are you here, really? Guilt? Gratitude? Neither, she said firmly. Respect. That caught him off guard. You helped me without knowing who I was, she continued. Without expectations. That's rare, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Michael glanced toward the front door, where he knew the kids were still watching from behind the curtain. And now you want to offer me a job, he said slowly. Victoria nodded. If you're interested, not because you helped me, but because I think you're exactly the kind of person we need. Michael looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time saw more than the heels and the title. He saw someone who, like him, was maybe just looking for something real. Michael leaned back against the porch railing, arms crossed, eyes narrowing just slightly. He wasn't suspicious, not exactly, but years of scraping by had taught him to look twice when something sounded too good to be true. Offers didn't just fall into your lap, especially not from women who wore watches worth more than your mortgage. Victoria seemed to sense it. She didn't rush, didn't talk down to him, just waited, patient, calm, her breath curling in the cold air between them. It's not a favor, she said finally, her voice steady. I want to be clear on that. Michael gave a half smile. Sure, feels like one. It's not, she repeated, firmer this time. It's an opportunity, one that I think you've earned, and not because you pushed my car. He let that hang there for a moment before replying. So what exactly are you offering? A temporary position, she said. One of the service managers at our South End lot is out for medical leave. I need someone reliable, someone who knows cars. It's entry-level management still, on the floor, but with responsibility. We'd start you as a trial, see how it fits. Michael raised an eyebrow. Trial, huh? She nodded. 90 days. You'd be working under the lead tech. Pays steady. Benefits kick in after the first month. He didn't speak right away. He wanted to say yes, or hell no, or ask why she'd even gone through the trouble, but mostly he was trying to figure out how fast the ground could shift beneath you when you weren't looking. And you're offering this, he said slowly, to a guy who showed up late to your dealership yesterday and didn't even make it through the front door? Victoria smiled, but it was a tired kind of smile, honest. That guy showed integrity, the kind we don't always find in boardrooms or resumes. You said no to money because it wasn't about that for you. That matters. Michael studied her, then looked out at the street. The Dodge sat quietly at the curb, exhaust puffing in tired bursts. His kids were still inside, waiting for breakfast, waiting for direction. For once, he had a choice that wasn't just about surviving the week. He turned back to Victoria. I'll take it, he said. And for the first time in a long while, something like hope settled in his chest. The South End lot was a sprawling glass and steel maze of polished cars and polished people. Everything gleamed from the showroom floor to the service base, and Michael felt every crack in his boots and every smudge on his calloused hands the second he stepped through the side entrance. It wasn't that he didn't belong. He knew cars, knew engines, leaks, squeaks, and how to coax life back into machines most techs would give up on. But this place wasn't like Turner's Garage, where you could toss a wrench across the room and yell over the radio. No, this place had rules, procedures, uniforms, and stairs. The first day started with a short, stiff orientation led by a manager named Rick, whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed Michael a badge and a clipboard and gestured vaguely toward the service bay like he was directing traffic, not a human being. Report to Luis in Bay 3, Rick said. "Try not to get in the way." Michael nodded, keeping it polite. He was used to being underestimated. It didn't bother him much anymore until he heard it. "Must be nice," someone muttered nearby. "Skip the line just 'cause the boss likes you." He turned toward the voice. But whoever said it was already walking off, wiping grease from their hands like they hadn't just taken a swing. Luis met him with a grunt and a nod. Mid-40s, solid build, and eyes that didn't miss much. He didn't say a lot, but after watching Michael swap out a cracked serpentine belt in under 20 minutes, he gave him a nod of approval that meant more than any compliment. Still, the whispers stuck. Lane's charity case. Must have done something real special to get on her radar. By lunch, Michael had already eaten alone in the break room, pretending not to hear the chuckles when he pulled out a sandwich wrapped in tinfoil. Didn't matter. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to work. And when he clocked out that evening, hands aching, boots worn, and back sore in all the usual places, he looked around at the lot bright, loud, and buzzing with energy and thought, "I've been through worse. Let them talk." He'd let his work speak louder. The days started blending together, each one a little heavier than the last. Michael was up before dawn, packing lunches by the glow of the fridge light, brushing tangles out of Emily's hair, finding Eli's missing sneaker under the couch, and running out the door with coffee he never had time to finish. By the time he dropped the kids at school and made it to the South End lot, he already felt like he'd lived a full day. The shop was fast, loud, ruthless. Time was money, and there was never enough of either. Michael worked like he always had, with his head down and his hands steady, but it didn't seem to buy him the same respect here. Everything was more complicated. Forms, metrics, efficiency trackers. He'd spent more time learning the software system than actually fixing anything that first week. Luis was fair, at least, gave him space, didn't coddle him, but didn't throw him under the bus either. Still, it was clear that Michael was an outsider, just another name on the roster, except whispered about a little more than most. And when 5 o'clock hit and the rest of the techs clocked out, Michael stayed. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he couldn't afford to fail. "Still here?" Luis asked one night as Michael tightened a bolt on a customer's sedan, his knuckles raw. "Yeah," Michael said without looking up. "Trying to catch up." Luis nodded. Didn't press. By the time he picked up Emily and Eli from his neighbor's house, it was past dark. The kids were groggy and cranky, dinner was cold leftovers, and the guilt sat in his chest like a brick. Emily tried to stay up and show him a drawing she made in class, but her eyes kept drifting shut. Eli fell asleep, mid-sentence, head on Michael's shoulder while cartoons flickered in the background. Later, as Michael folded laundry in the living room, his phone buzzed with a message from Rick. "Need you in early tomorrow. Be here by 6. He stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "Sure." He was too tired to feel angry, too worn to feel proud. He was just trying to hold it all together, one bolt at a time. The South End lot had a rooftop break area that most of the employees ignored. It was too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, and too quiet for a place where people preferred scrolling on phones and venting over vending machine coffee. But on Friday afternoon, just before the rush, Michael slipped up there with a stale granola bar and a lukewarm thermos, needing 5 minutes to breathe. The sky was soft with early clouds, and the air had that stillness that came before a storm. He sat on the edge of a bench, sipping what passed for coffee, elbows on his knees, body sore in places he'd stopped counting. He didn't hear the door until it clicked shut behind him. "Didn't expect anyone else up here," came a voice he knew too well. He turned. Victoria stood there in a dark wool coat, a to-go cup in one hand, the other tucked into her pocket like she wasn't sure if she should stay. Michael gave her a tired smile. "Didn't think executives needed air." She laughed softly. "We do. Just usually in boardrooms, with filtered vents and catered espresso." He scooted slightly, offering space on the bench. "This one's BYO burnt coffee and broken granola bars." She sat beside him, crossed one leg over the other, and looked out at the skyline, the rooftops, traffic, and faded edges of the city that had built them both in different ways. "How's it going?" she asked. Michael shrugged. "Depends which part you mean." "All of it." He was quiet a moment. "It's a lot. The job, the pace, the kids." "I'm doing my best." She nodded. "I know." There was something heavy in her voice, too careful, too practiced. Like she was used to being listened to but not really heard. "You okay?" he asked, surprising them both. Victoria looked over, her eyes tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. "Truth? Always." She took a long sip of her coffee, then exhaled. "I've built something most people think is impressive. And some days, it feels like I did it all just to sit in meetings with people who don't really know me, and go home to a house that's too quiet." Michael didn't say anything right away. Just nodded. "Sounds lonely." She looked at him, almost relieved. "It is." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was human. Real. For once, she wasn't a CEO. And he wasn't just the guy who pushed her car. They were two people who understood what it meant to carry more than anyone saw. It happened on a Saturday. Michael had promised the kids pancakes. Even though the mix was nearly gone and the milk was one day past its date. He was in the middle of flipping the last one when a knock sounded at the door, not the hesitant kind, but confident, like whoever was behind it wasn't used to waiting. Emily was the first to race over. "I'll get it," Michael called after her. "Wait, kiddo, let me see who." But she'd already swung the door open. Victoria stood there, bundled in a long coat, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a small white box and looking oddly unsure of herself. "Hi," she said. Emily blinked. "You're the car lady." Michael walked over, drying his hands on a dish towel, eyebrows raised. "This is unexpected." "I was in the area," she said, which they both knew wasn't true, "and I thought I'd return the favor. Donuts." She lifted the box a little, like it was a peace offering. Eli peeked around his sister's shoulder. "Do they have sprinkles?" Victoria smiled. "Half a dozen. All kinds." Emily turned to her dad. "Can she come in?" Michael hesitated, then stepped aside. "Sure." Inside, the living room was clean enough, though the worn couch sagged and the toys under the coffee table were only mostly hidden. Victoria didn't seem to notice. She crouched to Eli's level and offered the box like it was treasure. He opened it with reverence. "Whoa." Emily leaned closer. "Did you buy all these just for us?" "I might have," Victoria said with a conspiratorial smile. They sat around the coffee table eating donuts and talking about nothing important school art projects, favorite cartoons, how Eli once got his head stuck between the porch rails. Michael watched it all from the arm of the couch, half in awe. Victoria wasn't performing. She wasn't awkward. She was warm, real. She listened when Emily talked about her science fair volcano, and she laughed, actually laughed when Eli told his knock-knock jokes with no punchline. After a while, Michael caught her looking at the two of them, her expression softening in a way he hadn't seen before. "They're really good kids," she said quietly. He nodded. "They've been through a lot. Still smile like the world's perfect." Victoria looked at him then, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something gentler, something close to admiration. It was the first time she'd seen Michael as more than the guy who helped her on the roadside. It was the first time she saw the full picture. And she liked it. The South End lot buzzed with its usual Monday chaos, phones ringing, mechanics shouting over compressors, sales staff weaving between rows of gleaming vehicles with forced smiles and clipboards in hand. Michael was under the hood of a hybrid, with a cooling issue, grease on his forearms, sweat on his brow, trying to ignore the low murmur of conversations happening just a little too close. He heard his name before he saw the situation unfolding. "Yeah, him, the new guy. Said it'd be ready by noon." "It's 3. A tall man in a designer coat stood near the waiting area, arms crossed, eyes sharp. His BMW glinted under the pale winter sun. Rick, ever the peacekeeper when a customer had money, stood beside him, nodding like a bobblehead. Michael wiped his hands and approached. Is there a problem? The man turned to him immediately. You're Turner? I am, Michael said, calm. You're here for the X5? Was supposed to be done hours ago. I had a meeting. Missed it, Michael's brow furrowed. We headed down for a 2:30 pickup. I let service know it was tight, but it needed a new relay. Had to run diagnostics twice. I wasn't going to send you out in a car that might stall again. Rick jumped in, too quickly. Mr. Lennox, I apologize. We're still smoothing out some communication gaps. Michael's still getting up to speed. Michael's jaw tensed. The job was done right. If that's a problem, I can take you through every step myself. Rick gave him a tight look, a silent warning. Back down. Know your place. And then a new voice cut through the air. What seems to be the issue here? Heads turned. Victoria stood a few feet away, arms folded, eyes sharp as glass. Her heels clicked softly as she approached, perfectly composed despite the tension hanging in the lot. Mr. Lennox's demeanor changed instantly. Oh, Ms. Lane, I wasn't expecting— I'm sure, she said. But I like to see how my team is treated, especially when they're doing their jobs. She turned to Michael. Was the repair necessary? Yes. Was the delay for safety? It was. She nodded once, then looked back at Lennox. Then I support the decision. You got a safer car out of it. That's what matters. Rick blinked. Lennox sputtered. And Michael Hay just stood there, quietly stunned. Victoria smiled, but it wasn't for show. It was solidarity. If you have any further concerns, Mr. Lennox, I'll be happy to schedule a follow-up personally. The man nodded quickly, already backing down. Victoria gave Michael a small nod before walking off, heels clicking like punctuation marks on the pavement. For the first time, the whispers in the garage quieted. And Michael? He went back to work with, his head held just a little higher. The whispers started subtle, half-finished sentences that cut off when Michael entered a room, looks exchanged between sales staff when Victoria walked through the service bay. It wasn't just about the repairs anymore, it was about him and her. By Friday, it was impossible to ignore. She's in the garage again? Must be nice. Guess some folks skip the line and get coffee with the CEO. He fixing engines or hearts? Michael heard it all. Not just in passing, but from the way people stiffened around him. From the awkward pause in conversations. From the way Rick watched him nosmug like he was just waiting for Michael to mess up. It wasn't that he cared about gossip. He'd dealt with worse. But this was different. It wasn't just about him, it was about her, too. And she didn't deserve that. That afternoon, when Victoria stopped by the lot again, Michael caught her just as she stepped into her office, arms full of files. "Got a minute?" he asked, voice lower than usual. She looked up, surprised. "Of course. Come in." Her office was sleek, minimalist, full of clean lines and soft lighting. A different world from the grease and grime of the service bay. He stayed standing. "I need to ask," he said. "Are people talking?" Victoria set her things down, studying him carefully. "Yes, they're always talking." Michael's jaw clenched. "Because of me?" She tilted her head. "Partly, but mostly because I'm a woman in charge who doesn't act like a wall. That's not fair." "No," she agreed, "but it's predictable." Michael ran a hand through his hair. "If this whatever it asserts your reputation, I can keep my distance. I don't want to be a liability." Victoria stood quietly for a moment, then stepped closer, her voice soft. "You're not a liability, Michael. You're one of the few people here who says what he means. That's rare." He met her gaze, conflicted. "I just don't want to be the reason people stop respecting you." She smiled gently. "Let them talk. I've spent years earning my place. I'm not giving that power away just because someone saw us sharing coffee." Michael let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Still," he said, "maybe I'll start drinking it in the break room." She laughed, the tension easing. "Only if you bring the good kind. That stuff you drink in the bay is basically motor oil." He grinned. "It's cheaper." But as he left her office, he felt something different, settle between them something unspoken, but no less real. It wasn't just rumors. It was something more. And it was getting harder to ignore. It was later than either of them intended to stay. The South End lot was dark, save for the faint glow from Victoria's office and the humming exit signs in the hallway. The staff had cleared out hours ago, the floors silent, the coffee machines quiet. Michael had stayed behind to finish some late diagnostics, and Victoria, well, she always stayed behind. He was about to head out when he saw the light still on in her office. Something made him stop at her door. "You ever go home?" he asked, leaning casually against the frame. She looked up from her laptop, reading glasses perched low on her nose. Apparently not. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You know, for someone who owns the place, you sure work like you're afraid of getting fired." Victoria chuckled, then pulled off her glasses and leaned back in her chair. Old habits. Michael sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her face. She looked tired, not the curated kind of tired she usually wore, but something deeper, realer. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead." "Why do you do it?" All this, the hours, the pressure, the empire, her eyes drifted to the large window behind him, where the city lights blinked far in the distance. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "Because I had something to prove." He waited, letting the silence stretch. "My father started with one used car lot and a notebook full of IOUs, she said. Worked himself into the ground, building it into something real. But when he got sick, everyone assumed I'd sell it, or let someone else run it. What does a girl know about torque ratios?" She added, bitterly. Michael frowned. "I didn't know that." "No one does," she said. "They see the title, the suits, the shoes. They don't see the nights I spent in the back office learning to balance books at 16, or the deals I made while wiping my eyes after burying the man who taught me what integrity looked like." Michael's throat tightened. "You built this place for him." She nodded. "And for me. To prove I was more than the woman people underestimated." He leaned forward, voice softer now. "You don't have to prove it anymore." Her eyes flicked to his. "Don't I?" They sat there, the air thick with honesty, the walls between them beginning to crumble. She wasn't the cold CEO with the perfect posture. Not tonight. She was someone who fought her way to the top and paid for it in ways no one ever saw. The living room was buzzing with chaos streamers barely hanging from thumbtacks, a lopsided cake on the kitchen counter, and a herd of second graders darting between chairs with frosting-covered hands and wild energy. Michael stood near the fridge, paper plate in hand, watching it all unfold with the tired satisfaction of a dad who'd pulled a birthday party out of thin air. Emily was beaming. She wore a paper crown made out of construction paper and glitter glue, and her cheeks were pink with excitement. Eli had taken on balloon patrol duty, proudly guarding the corner where 3 of them had already popped. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't Pinterest perfect, but it was hers. And Michael had done everything he could to make it feel special. He didn't expect the knock on the door. When he opened it, his heart did a weird little stutter. Victoria stood on the porch. Dressed down in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. She looked normal, almost like she belonged here. In her hands was a gift bag, the kind with metallic tissue paper and a crisp bow that looked store-wrapped. "Hey," she said, a little uncertain. "I hope it's okay. I know I wasn't invited or anything, but I remembered you said it was Emily's birthday and, well, I wanted to bring something." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, smiling gently. "That's kind of why I wanted to." He stepped aside and she walked in carefully, like she was crossing some invisible line. When Emily saw her, she froze mid-step. "It's the donut lady," she whispered, awestruck. Victoria laughed. "Close. But today, I come bearing presents." Emily ran over, her eyes wide. "For me?" Victoria knelt and handed her the bag. "For you. Happy birthday, Emily." Inside was a small wooden jewelry box with hand-painted flowers and a tiny golden lock delicate, beautiful, and unlike anything Emily had ever owned. Michael watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, walls up but a little softer than usual. She didn't come to impress, she came to care. And that did something he wasn't ready to admit. As the kids swarmed back to their games, Emily clutched her new treasure, like it was the crown jewel of the day. She looked up at Victoria and said, "You can come to my next birthday too." Victoria's eyes softened. "I'd like that." And Michael? He just watched, feeling something in his chest shift. Maybe this woman wasn't just passing through after all. Michael had never worn a tie that cost more than a tank of gas until now. The one he had on felt stiff around his neck, like it knew he didn't belong. His dress shirt was borrowed from Luis, half a size too tight in the shoulders, and his jacket hadn't been used since his cousin's wedding 3 years ago. But none of that mattered as he stepped into the Lane Auto Group's downtown headquarters. This wasn't the South End lot. This was a whole other world: marble floors, walls of glass, and the quiet hum of money moving in every direction. He'd been invited by Victoria. "Just to observe," she'd said. "You have perspective they don't," she told him. "And I trust it." That made one of them. The boardroom was sleek and cold, a long mahogany table surrounded by suits who'd never turned a wrench in their lives. Michael sat near the far end, quiet, hands folded, trying not to fiddle with the cuff of his shirt. They talked margins, numbers, distribution strategies, sales projections. It was a language Michael mostly followed, though every now and then it felt like code spoken in a room full of people trained to sound smart without saying much. Then came the service division report: delays, missed targets, declining customer satisfaction. Victoria, seated near the head of the table, glanced down the row toward him. "Michael," she said, voice even, "you've been working directly with the service team. Any thoughts?" All eyes turned. Michael cleared his throat. "Honestly? You're not losing customers because of slow repairs. You're losing them because they feel like numbers. Half the folks that come through the bay don't understand what we're fixing or why it's just a bill and a smile. If you added a quick tech walkthrough for every repair, like a 60-second video or even a printed note with a picture, they'd feel like they were in the loop." The room went still. One executive raised a brow. "You want to personalize every service job?" "I want people to trust us," Michael said. "Cars break down, but if we treat people like humans instead of tickets, they come back. I've seen it." Silence. Then, slowly, Victoria nodded. "Let's build a pilot program. South End first." Someone scoffed. Another jotted notes. Michael sat back, heart pounding, but not from nerves. Because for the first time, in a room full of boardroom brilliance, it was the guy from the backyard garage who'd made them listen. The garage was quiet in a way it never was during daylight. Tools rested in their drawers. The harsh overhead lights were off, replaced by a soft glow from the old desk lamp Michael had dragged out to the floor. Outside, the wind rustled through the chain-link fence, the city humming in the distance. Victoria stood near the open bay door, coat draped over a stool, sleeves rolled up as she helped him finish the last of the quarterly inventory count. He hadn't expected her to show up, let alone stay late, but there she was, balancing clipboards and moving through the grease-stained floor like she belonged. No heels tonight, just sneakers and a ponytail. The version of her no one ever saw, but Michael was starting to know well. "You weren't kidding," she said, checking off the last line item. "This place is missing 3 oil filters, but somehow has 7 timing belts." Michael chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Welcome to South End. Nothing ever adds up, but it all works out." She smiled, but it faded slowly, her eyes lingering on him as he leaned over the tool cart. "You do a lot for this place." He looked up. "I do what I can." "No," she said softly. "You do more than that. You show up for people, even when they don't notice." The words hit deeper than they should have. Maybe because no one ever said them to him. Not like that. Not with that look in their eyes. He stepped closer, just enough to feel the space between them tighten. "And you? You're not what people think either." She tilted her head. "What do they think?" "That you're cold, untouchable, corporate. And what do you think?" Michael met her gaze. The soft lamplight caught the edge of her face, the tension between them stretching thin and sharp. "I think you're stronger than you let on, and lonelier than you pretend." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Then, in one breathless beat, she leaned in and he met her halfway. The kiss wasn't polished. It wasn't planned. It was the kind that came after too many late nights, too many close calls, too many feelings pushed down, and finally let go. When they broke apart, Victoria didn't step back. Neither did he. "Was that a mistake?" she whispered. Michael shook his head, voice low. "No, but it's going to complicate everything." She smiled, just a little. Good. The air between them had changed. Not in the obvious way, no grand declarations, no stolen glances when others weren't looking, but in the quiet space that followed the kiss. It lingered like the scent of engine oil after the garage had gone still, charged, unspoken. Heavy with everything they didn't say. They hadn't talked about it for 2 days. Michael worked the morning shift, kept his head down, buried himself in back-to-back repairs. Victoria stayed mostly in the main office, her messages clipped, professional. She didn't stop by the service bay, and when she passed him in the hall, their eyes didn't quite meet. Finally, late in the evening after close, she found him in the break room alone, finishing off a coffee that had long since gone cold. "You've been avoiding me," she said gently, leaning against the doorway. He looked up. Tired. Guarded. Wasn't sure what to say. Victoria stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind her. "Then, let me start." He raised an eyebrow. She exhaled. "That night, it meant something to me." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." "But," she said, voice softening, "we have to be smart." Michael stared down at the cup in his hands. "Because of the job." "Because of the job," she echoed. "Because people are already talking. Because every move you make here is being watched by people waiting for you to screw up." He glanced at her. "You worried about your reputation?" "No," she said. "I'm worried about yours." That caught him off guard. "I've had years to survive in this world," she said. "You just got here, and I don't want something real between us to get twisted into something it's not." Michael leaned back, folding his arms. "So what are we saying?" "We cool off," she said carefully. "Keep things professional, at least for now." He didn't argue. Part of him hated it. The other part knew she was right. "All right," he said. "Professional it is." She gave him a small, sad smile, the kind you wear when your head wins but your heart isn't ready to lose. Michael nodded and stood, brushing past her on his way out. Their shoulders nearly touched, nearly. And in that space, between what almost happened and what couldn't, something stronger took root. Quiet. Steady. Still there. It came in an envelope, not a conversation. Michael found it sitting on his workbench in the bay, neatly sealed, his name written in clean, careful handwriting. At first, he thought it was just another form, maybe a schedule shift or an HR notice. But when he opened it, the words stopped him cold. Offer of promotion. Acting service manager. South End. Lot full. Time. Benefits. Salary bump. Leadership role. No note. No explanation. Just the facts. Staring up at him like a dare. He stood there for a full minute, the paper trembling just slightly in his hands, heart beating faster than it should. It was everything. He'd been working toward security, stability, a shot at giving his kids something better. And yet, all he could feel was the weight. Later that day, after the rush died down, he walked up the stairs to Victoria's office. She was at her desk, typing, calm as always. But when she looked up and saw the envelope in his hand, she knew. "You got it," she said simply. "I did." Michael shut the door behind him. He didn't sit. "This isn't because of the kiss, is it?" "No," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. This has nothing to do with us. It's because you've earned it. Your numbers are the highest on the floor. You've increased turnaround time, customer satisfaction, and retention all in under 90 days. You're the best person for the job." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know how this is going to look, right?" Victoria leaned back. "It already looks that way. You taking or not taking the job won't change that." "I don't want handouts," he said. "You think I'd risk my reputation again just to hand you something you didn't earn?" Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "If anything, I waited too long." Michael stayed quiet, not because he didn't believe Harry did, but because saying yes felt like stepping over a line. One he'd already gotten too close to. "I'm giving you this," she added more gently now, "because I trust you with it. What you do next is up to you." He finally nodded, slowly. "Let me think about it." "Of course." As he turned to leave, she said one last thing. "You don't owe anyone an apology for being good at what you do." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him long after the door clicked shut. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a Maserati pulling into the executive lot. Michael was helping a new tech finish a tire rotation when he saw its sleek, matte black, not even a speck of dust on the body, the kind of car that didn't just arrive at announced. He watched as the driver stepped out, adjusting an expensive blazer, sunglasses still on even under cloudy skies. Luis walked past, muttering under his breath, "Here comes trouble." Michael wiped his hands and leaned against the bay wall, curiosity piqued. The man walked through the showroom like he owned it. And, to Michael's surprise, Victoria was already waiting, arms folded, posture straight, face unreadable. "Griffin," she said, cool and crisp. "Still calling me that," he replied with a smirk. I missed that tone. Michael couldn't hear the rest, but the tension was impossible to miss. The two stood a little too close, their conversation fast and sharp. At one point, Victoria stepped slightly back, and Griffin followed uninvited. Later that afternoon, Michael passed by the executive conference room and heard raised voices behind the closed door. He didn't mean to linger, but a name caught his ear. "Turner? Really, Vic? A service tech?" It was Griffin. "His title isn't your concern," Victoria replied, voice even but edged. "It is when you're letting your personal life bleed into the boardroom. Investors are talking." There was a pause, then her voice steel wrapped in velvet. "And you're still confusing proximity with relevance? This company isn't yours to comment on anymore." Michael stepped away before they caught him listening, but the echo of Griffin's words stuck with him like a wrench left in the wrong gear, gnawing, intrusive, and dangerous. Later that evening, as Michael closed up the bay, Griffin approached him in the parking lot. "So," he said, hands in his coat pockets, "you're the charity case I've been hearing about. Michael didn't rise to it. You always make a habit of introducing yourself with an insult?" Griffin smiled like someone used to winning. "Just making sure you know where you stand." Michael held his ground. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Griffin's smile faltered, just a crack. "Watch yourself, Turner." Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The lines were drawn. And someone like Griffin didn't like losing territory, especially when it came to Victoria Lane. It started with a callback. A customer from South End returned with smoke pouring from the hood of a brand new hybrid SUV just 3 days out of the shop, where Michael had signed off on a routine service. The man was furious, shouting in the service bay about negligence, about lawsuits, about how Lane Auto Group was a joke. Michael stood there, stunned, scanning the service history on the tablet, heart thudding. Everything had been fine when it left. The work was logged, checked, double-checked. There was no reason for a failure like this. But when he opened the hood, his stomach dropped. The oil cap was gone. The lines had been tampered with. The filter was loose, deliberately loose. And his name was on the paperwork. Rick arrived first, smelling blood. "You're the one who signed it out," he said, arms folded, voice sharp. "I didn't do this," Michael said, jaw tight. "Someone messed with it after the fact." Rick's tone turned condescending. You expect us to believe sabotage? Come on, Turner, this is your mistake, own it. Michael glared at him. I triple check every job, asked Luis. But Luis wasn't in that day, out sick. The only other tech who'd touched that car was already gone home. Within the hour, corporate had been alerted. Victoria showed up not long after, face unreadable as she scanned the report Rick handed her. This is serious, she said, eyes flicking to Michael. I know, he replied, quieter now. But it wasn't me. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. We'll investigate internally, Rick scoffed. You're just going to take his word for it? No, she said, cool and even. I'm going to take the evidence. But the damage was done. Word spread fast. Customers asked for other techs. Staff kept their distance. Michael could feel the eyes on his back with every bolt he tightened, every hood he opened. That night, while rechecking the logs alone in the shop, Michael found something, an altered timestamp on the SUV's job file. An edit that had been backdated. Someone had gone in after him, and they wanted him to take the fall. He didn't know who yet. But he was going to find out. Because this wasn't just about a car. It was about everything. Victoria sat alone in her office. The city skyline stretched behind her in cold, indifferent light. Her desk was scattered with reports, complaint emails, and flagged memasol centered around one name, Michael Turner. It wasn't just the botched service job anymore, it was the whispers in board meetings. The veiled questions from investors. The not-so-subtle tone in Griffin's last call. He's a liability, Vic. You're letting your feelings write policy. She stared at the screen, Michael's employee file open but untouched. His numbers were strong. Customer reviews before the incident were stellar. His ideas had saved the company thousands in just a few weeks. And yet this scandal was dragging everything into doubt. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her. He hadn't asked her to defend him. He never did. That was part of the problem. He took the heat, kept his head down, never once throwing blame. And for some reason, that made her want to protect him even more. That was what scared her. There was a soft knock at the door. Rick stepped in without waiting. Board's asking questions again. They want to know if you're putting the company at risk. Victoria didn't look up. Michael didn't sabotage that car. Maybe not, Rick said, voice like a scalpel. But it happened on his watch. And the narrative is already written. Customers don't wait for the full story, they react to the headlines. She sighed. So what's your recommendation? Cut him loose, he said flatly. Quietly. Say it's procedural. Save face. Get ahead of it before it stains your name too. When he left, she didn't move for a long time. That night, she drove the long way home. No driver, no meetings, just her, alone, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Her chest ached in a way it hadn't in years. Because she knew what she was supposed to do. But doing the smart thing might mean walking away from the first person in a long time who saw her as more than her title. And that was her breaking point. What did she owe? More her legacy or her heart? The official meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. Michael sat across from Rick in the tiny, windowless HR room, the fluorescent light above them flickering just enough to make his head throb. A company liaison read from a typed letter, her voice flat and emotionless, like she was reciting parking regulations. We regret to inform you that, following an internal investigation, your employment with Lane Auto Group is being terminated, effective immediately. Michael didn't blink, didn't interrupt. He just stared at the table. Due to the nature of the incident and the resulting liability exposure, we're unable to provide a recommendation at this time. Rick didn't look at him. He just stared at the wall like he had somewhere better to be. When they slid the paperwork across the table, Michael didn't touch it. I didn't do it, he said finally. Quiet. Firm. We've reviewed the logs, the liaison replied. There's no conclusive evidence proving otherwise. He looked up then. That's because someone covered their tracks. Rick gave a small, performative sigh. Michael, no one wants this to be personal. But it is personal, Michael cut in. It's always been. You never wanted me here. Rick stood. You're free to contest the termination, but I'd suggest you move on. Sometimes, cutting losses is the most professional thing a man can do. Michael's hands curled into fists, but he kept them on his knees. For his kids. For his dignity. He signed nothing, said nothing else. Just gathered his things, what little there was, and walked out of the bay for the last time. No goodbyes. No second chances. As he stepped outside, the cold hit hard. The sun was too bright for a day like this, and his breath steamed in the air as he stared at the lot one last time. He didn't expect Victoria to come out. And she didn't. That cut deeper than the firing, because part of him, maybe a foolish part had, thought she'd fight for him. That she'd walk into that meeting, slam down the truth, and pull him out of the flames. Instead, silence. As he drove away in the same truck that brought him there, empty-handed and blamed for something he didn't do, one thought looped in his mind. Guess that was her way of ending things clean. The apartment felt smaller now. Not physically, but in spirit. Like the air had thickened somehow, heavy with the absence of something they hadn't even named. It had been 3 days since Michael lost the job. 3 days of unanswered calls, unopened emails, and staring too long at the front door, as if it might open and fix everything. He hadn't told the kids yet. Not the whole truth. Just that he was taking some time off. Just that things were changing, but it would be okay. He always said it would be okay. But this time, he didn't believe it. Emily was the one who finally broke the silence. They were sitting around the dinner table, picking at grilled cheese and soup. Eli was more interested in making bread crusts into boats than eating them. Emily's voice was quiet, careful. Dad? Yeah, sweetheart? She glanced down at her plate, then back up. Is Miss Victoria mad at us? Michael blinked. What? She hasn't come over, not since my birthday. Eli chimed in, mouth half full. She brought the box with the lock, remember? The one you hide stuff in, Em. Michael set down his spoon, heart tightening. No, he said softly. She's not mad at you. Then why doesn't she visit anymore? Emily asked. Did she stop liking us? No, baby. He reached across the table, took her small hand in his. She didn't stop liking you. Sometimes grown-ups have stuff they need to figure out. And it doesn't mean anything you did was wrong. It's just complicated. Emily's eyes searched his face like she could see through the cracks he was trying to cover. Did she stop liking you? Michael didn't answer right away. Eli looked up. But you liked her, I saw. Michael smiled faintly. Yeah, I did. The room went quiet again. Emily pressed her lips together like she was holding in more questions, more feelings, more hurt. But she didn't ask. Instead, she just said, I hope she figures it out soon. Michael gave her hand a squeeze, the ache in his chest threatening to rise. Me too, kiddo, he whispered. Me too. The box sat untouched in the corner of Michael's bedroom for days, just a battered old cardboard thing filled with work notes, invoices, receipts, and stray tools he'd scooped up after getting fired. He hadn't planned to look at it again. What was the point? The job was gone. The trust was broken. The door had slammed shut. But late one night, after putting Emily and Eli to bed and staring blankly at a rerun with the volume turned low, something pulled him to it. He sat on the floor, opened the box, and began to dig. Old service orders. A handful of sticky notes from Luis, a crumpled shift calendar. His eyes scanned each page without really seeing it until he found the repair tag for the hybrid SUV. The one that had brought everything crashing down. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, at the timestamp, his name. His initials. But there was something off. The font was different on the time logged for final inspections, lightly darker, tighter. Michael had seen enough of the Lane Auto system to know it wasn't normal. It had been edited, not retyped, overridden. He flipped through a few more tickets and found another one same day, same tech on duty. The formatting was different. The edit wasn't subtle once you knew what to look for. Something clicked. He grabbed his old tablet, still logged into the outdated training portal, and cross-referenced shift logs and repair entries. 45 minutes later, he found the smoking gun. Rick had accessed the job file after Michael clocked out that day. Used an admin override code. Michael sat back, heart pounding. He hadn't just been blamed. He'd been set up. By someone with motive, access and a reason to see him gone. The next morning, he showed up at the South End lot unannounced, file folder under his arm, jaw set like steel. He walked right past the front desk, ignored Rick's startled expression, and made his way to Victoria's office. He didn't knock. When she looked up, startled, he said only one thing: "I've got proof, and you need to see it." The quarterly board review was already in full swing by the time Michael entered the glass conference room. Suits lined both sides of the long table, the hum of finance updates and growth projections bouncing off marble floors and polished walls. Victoria sat near the head of the table, composed but distant, her eyes fixed on a presentation she clearly wasn't listening to. When the door opened, every head turned. Michael stood in the doorway, out of breath, holding a folder clutched tightly in one hand. He wasn't wearing a tie. His shirt sleeves were rolled. Grease still lingered under his nails. Victoria's eyes widened when she saw him. "Michael." "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "But there's something you all need to see, and I'm not leaving until you hear it." Rick, seated near the center, let out a long, theatrical sigh. "This is highly irregular. He doesn't even work here anymore." "Because you framed me," Michael said, stepping forward. The room went dead silent. Michael placed the folder on the table and slid it down toward Victoria. She opened it cautiously. Inside were side-by-side printouts of system logs, screenshots of admin overrides, and a list of timestamps that didn't match. Her eyes scanned the pages, growing sharper by the second. "The job that got me fired," Michael said, voice steady, "was accessed and edited after I clocked out. Rick used his override credentials. I traced every change." Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria looked up, her gaze locking with Rick's. "Is this true?" Rick's jaw twitched. "This is ridiculous. He's just bitter he's twisting the data." Victoria stood. "Don't," she said coldly. "Don't lie to me in this room." Rick stammered, but the damage was done. Executives leaned forward, murmuring. One of them whispered to the CFO. Another reached for his phone. Victoria closed the folder, turned to Michael, and spoke clearly. "Thank you. You didn't just clear your name, you exposed something I should have seen a long time ago." Michael looked at her, emotion flickering behind his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel small or expendable. He felt heard. And in that room full of power suits and glass walls, it wasn't the CEO or the executives who had control. It was the man who refused to let the truth stay buried. The air in Victoria's office was different this time. Not heavy, not tense, just still. Michael stood across from her desk, the folder of evidence now resting on a shelf behind her, like a closed chapter. Outside, the sun filtered through the tall windows, casting golden light across the clean lines of her desk. But she wasn't looking at her computer or paperwork. She was looking at him. "You didn't just protect your name," she said. "You protected my company." Michael gave a quiet shrug. "Wasn't just about me. What Rick did, he could have done it to anyone. But he didn't," Victoria said softly. "He picked you, because he thought no one would listen." There was a pause between them. Not awkward, just full. "I'm not here for a victory lap," Michael said. "I didn't come back for a pat on the back or to prove something." "I know," she said. Then she reached for a new envelope on her desk and slid it toward him. "But I'm hoping you'll stay anyway." He eyed it warily. "Is this another manager offer?" "Better," she said. "Director of Community Engagement." He blinked. "Wait, what?" "It's a new role," she explained. "One I've wanted to create for years but never found the right person for. Someone who understands the people we serve. someone who can bridge the gap between the shop floor and the boardroom. You've done more for this company's heart than anyone in this building. Michael opened the envelope and scanned the offer. It was more than just a title. It was a real seat at the table. Benefits, freedom to shape programs, initiatives to serve under-resourced communities, opportunities to build apprenticeship track. She's ideas, on paper. You're serious, he said. I don't hand out jobs out of guilt, Michael, she replied. And I don't do favors, I do partnerships. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Why me? Because you remind me of the reason this company was built in the first place, and because I trust you not just with a wrench, but with people. Michael didn't answer right away. He let it settle in. The weight, the shift, the chance to do something that mattered. He smiled, slow and genuine. Then let's get to work. They didn't make an announcement. There was no press release, no awkward staff memo, no company-wide email asking everyone to respect boundaries. But people noticed. The way Victoria lingered a little longer when she passed Michael in the hallway. How their conversations in the break room weren't just about reports or team metrics anymore. The way he smiled at her like she was more than his boss and she didn't look away. It started with small things. Lunches taken on the roof instead of behind closed doors. Coffee shared in the sunlight, not behind frosted glass. A touch on the arm as one passed the other in the service bay. Not inappropriate, not secret, just real. They'd both earned their scars the hard way. She, through years of being underestimated in rooms full of men who thought ambition was only respectable when it wore a tie. He, through long hours, lost jobs, and showing up for his kids every day without fail. Now, neither of them wanted to pretend. One night, after everyone else had left the South End lot, Victoria waited by his truck's same spot where they'd first kissed under the dull hum of the bay lights. "You're sure about this?" she asked, leaning against the fender, arms folded but eyes soft. Michael stepped close, hands in his jacket pockets. "I've never been more sure of anything that made absolutely no sense on paper." She laughed, and he loved that sound-free, unguarded hers. "I'm not going to be easy," she warned. "I work too much. I worry too much. I don't always know how to let people in." "I'm not asking for easy," he said. "I'm asking for us." She tilted her head, that smile still lingering. "Then here we are." He kissed her, slow and steady, not hidden this time, not rushed, and when they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "They're going to talk," she whispered. "Let 'em," he said. "We've got nothing to hide." And just like that, two hearts that had spent years building walls finally stood in the open, aligned, steady, and no longer afraid of being seen. The banner hung proudly above the showroom. Lane South Community Center grand opening. But this wasn't just a new dealership. It was something entirely different. Rows of folding chairs lined the lot, filled with neighbors, single parents, trade school students, teachers, old customers, and curious onlookers. Kids darted between balloon arches and food trucks while a local band played classic rock under a blue canvas tent. The scent of hot dogs and motor oil mingled in the Ira, strangely perfect combination. Michael stood near the ribbon with Emily on one side and Eli on the other, both dressed in their good shoes and grinning ear to ear. Emily clutched a clipboard, having appointed herself junior assistant of something very important. "Do I get to cut the ribbon too?" Eli whispered, eyes wide. Michael smiled. "Only if you promise not to run with the scissors afterward." Victoria approached the mic just as the crowd quieted. She looked every bit the poised CEO, but Michael could see it in her eyes. This meant more than any quarterly profit ever had. "When we first talked about building a new location," she began, "we didn't want to just create another place to buy cars. We wanted a place where people felt seen, where families could come and be cared for, where someone out of work could learn a trade, where kids could play safely while their parents worked hard to make ends meet." Applause, nods, a few tears from the older crowd. Behind her, the glass showroom gleamed, but inside, it held more than rows of cars. There was a small but fully staffed daycare, a quiet study space with donated computers, and 4 service bays already filled with eager apprentices turning their first wrenches. All of it real. All of it theirs. Michael stepped up beside her as she cut the ribbon, the crowd cheering. Cameras flashed. But none of that mattered. He looked at her, his hand gently brushing hers, and whispered, "You built the empire. I'm just trying to make it feel like home." She smiled. "You didn't just make it home, Michael. You gave it a heart." And with that, the doors opened wide, warm, and ready. The crowd had thinned, the sun lowering into a soft amber haze as the final notes from the band faded into the breeze. People milled about with half-empty cups of lemonade and laughter still echoing through the lot. Children chased each other near the tire display while a young apprentice gave his proud mother a tour of the garage. Victoria stood on a small platform beneath the fluttering banner, the microphone now forgotten in her hand as she looked out at the space she and Michael had built together. Not just a dealership, a place with purpose. She cleared her throat gently, and those still lingering turned to listen. "There's something I didn't say earlier," she began, her voice steady but warm. "Something I've wanted to share since the day this idea became more than just a proposal on a desk." Michael, standing near the front with Emily on his shoulders and Eli leaning against his leg, looked up, surprised. "This," she gestured around her, "all of this didn't start with a business plan or a strategy meeting. It started on the side of a back road, with steam rising from under a hood, and a man who stopped without hesitation to help someone who looked like she didn't belong." Soft laughter stirred the air. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, bashful under the attention. "I didn't tell him who I was," she continued. "I didn't offer him a reason to care, but he helped anyway. No money, no agenda, just kindness. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just in my car, but in me." Her voice wavered for just a beat, but she held firm. "That one act of decency reminded me what business should be about. Not power, not optics, people. That's what this place stands for now. That's what he stands for." Michael's eyes met hers across the space. She smiled. "So when you walk through those doors," she finished, "I hope you feel it. The heart behind the work, the story behind the shine. Because it all started with a push and became a purpose." The crowd clapped, but Michael didn't hear much of it. His world had narrowed to her, standing in the golden light, telling the truth that had brought them both to this moment. He didn't need a stage or applause. He just needed that look from her to know it had all been worth it.